short time after, the hijack opens up with 10-8 suited. The cutoff calls with Queen-Jack offsuit. He's the player who I just shown the full house to. I pick up Jack-8 of hearts, and I prefer to 3-bet rather than call here usually, but I've been 3-betting a lot. I'm in position. My hand has a decent amount of potential, and we're pretty deep, so I just flat. Andrew comes along as well. We go 4 ways to the flop.
Who do you think is going to win?
I'm going to go with Brad Owen. No, I'm going to go with Snuggie.
I would go with Snuggie if I were...
Hold on, I take Snuggie.
Mark's mom.
I mean, Brad does have the backdoor flush draw.
He's got an open ender for the chop.
Snuggie flops a straight, and it's checked to him. He bets 50. I've seen Snuggie play an extremely wide pre-flop range. I've also seen him make bluff attempts and multi-way pots. There's nothing in this hand so far that necessarily indicates he's super strong. I've got an open ender with a backdoor flush draw. I go for the raise to 160, hoping that I can take it down right away, but if not, I'm building a bigger pot in case I do hit my hand. Little do I know that I can't even win outright if I do make a straight. Also, it's worth noting at this time that I would play Queen Jack, pocket 10s, pocket 9s, King 10, King 9, and 10 9 the same way up to this point, so I'll have a ton of value raises in my range. Too bad for me, I'm up against the nuts because I raise here and...
That's not going to work out. It's not going to go well for Brad.
No, Batiste going to have an easy fold.
Do you think Snuggie can find a just call here, or do you think he's going to feel obligated to raise?
I think it's very reasonable for him to raise, and I expect him to raise.
People that Mark knew.
I get stared down for a long time by 10-8 suited.
Batiste looks like Brad must just killed his family, and he's finally found him.
It's like the end of The Revenant.
Yeah, it's like, I finally got you, buddy. You're cornered.
Sorry.
Now you will face my wrath.
Eventually, Baptiste does lay his hand down. The action is back on Snuggie with a straight. He just flats, which is surprising to me. I don't expect him to do this with a strong but very vulnerable hand out of position, since there are a lot of cards that could either kill the action for him or potentially pair the board and make the hand much more difficult for him to play. I don't think he'll do this with a straight or set. I mainly put him on 2-pair hands, 1-pair hands with gut shot straight draws, or potentially just a gutter with an overcard like ace queen or ace jack. The turn is the ace of hearts, gives me the flush draw. My equity jumps from 10% to 22%, so it's a great card for me. Snuggie now leads for 210. It's less than a half pot size bet, and it's somewhat confusing to me. Seems like a blocker bet. I feel like I'm still up against ace queen, ace jack, king queen, king jack, king 10, or 10 9. I contemplate raising because I can still have the nuts in my range, and I feel it's unlikely that my opponent is going to have one himself. I'm getting a great price, and I have implied odds working for me too though, so I just call, hoping for a heart now. I don't get any help. The river is another 9.
That does pair the board, so it's slightly frightening for Snuggie, but he's going to lead anyway. I like betting again.
Snuggie bets 335. Not much I can do here. I've got nothing. I can only fold, and that's what I do. I fold. I fold, right? Well, Snuggie bet 38% a pot. I get the sense that he's afraid of something. I don't think he'll necessarily show up with a boat or a straight very often here. Me, on the other hand, I could certainly play full houses like this, and on rare occasions, even queen jack. The last hand I played with Snuggie, I showed him that I raised him on the turn with a boat. That should have gotten me a lot of credit. He thought I was a nit before that, so I feel like it's a good time to cash in on my image. I pull the trigger and raise to 1100. Even if I do get called, I can't imagine a better situation to get caught bluffing. This opponent plays every hand that he can, and he's on my direct right, while plenty of opportunities to get my money back from him if it does go poorly. And as you can imagine, Snuggie snap calls.
Did he fold?
I don't know. No, it looks like it was a call.
No, he folded!
Oh!
Snuggie folded!
Just kidding. He snap folds face up. I can't bluff a player like this without showing him. I turn over the hand, hoping that it'll go off the rails a little. He takes it well at first, but his play definitely loosens up even more than it was before. We're in a great position to win lots of money.
How about Brad Owen pulling the trigger there? That was strong.
It was very strong.
Nearly 2 hours in, Trey picks up King Jack offsuit in hand number 54. If you haven't noticed yet, there's a hand counter in the bottom right corner of the screen. That's one of several new additions to the revamped stream at the Lodge. Trey's first to act, he raises to 300. It folds to Doug in the big blind who has ace-4 suited. It looks like he's thinking about 3-betting. Instead, he calls. We've got queen 10 suited in the under the gun straddle. At the moment, we have a tight image. I consider putting in a 3-bet squeeze. You can see it on my face that I'd like to do it. You can also see in another chart that Petrangelo gave me that when you're in the straddle and an early position player raises, followed by a big blind call, you're supposed to 3-bet Queen 10 suited around 40% of the time. When this course comes out and you see all the charts, it's going to completely change your game. In the meantime, I'll show you some charts occasionally in interesting spots as they come up. I elect to just flat and close the action. We're going 3 ways to the flop. It comes ace-9 deuce rainbow. We've got nothing except some backdoor draws. Doug checks his top pair. We check. Trey wants to rep the ace that Doug has. He bets 425. If Doug folds, my mind immediately goes towards the thought of check raising. Our hand isn't really good enough to call, but we have lots of cards that can help us on the turn. We can rep hands like sets of 9s and deuces, as well as ace-9 and ace-deuce. If Doug calls, I should just give up. But now that we're getting 4-1, and with my tight image to fall back on in case we're not able to make a hand, I can perhaps cash in on the credit that I have built up and get a bluff through if I see an opening later. I make a speculative call. With no real draws out there other than to the wheel, it should look like I've got at least a pair, if not a monster, given the fact that I've overcalled on a relatively dry board. The turn is the deuce of clubs, giving us the flush draw and fake trips if we want to represent it. We're by far the most likely to be holding a deuce in our hand. If you go back to the chart, you see that we're supposed to be defending our straddle with all but 3 suited deuces. Doug checks, we check. Trey knows that the deuce is bad for him. He gives up and checks back. The bad news is that the river is the 9 of spades. We break the flush, but we'll have a lot of full houses and sometimes even quads. Doug checks. He knows that I'll often have at least an ace, if not something much stronger. I didn't flat with backdoor draws to have a perfect bluff opportunity fall into our lap and not take advantage of it. I bet 1200 into 2200. It should look like I'm trying to get called, and again, the only draw that missed is something like 5-4, so I'm going to have a monster a ton of the time. Trey folds his king high. Doug has a much tougher decision. He doesn't beat anything that I'd be betting for value, including some aces like ace-10, ace-jack, and maybe even sometimes ace-queen. I'm sure that he has a sixes hand, and the fact that I played snug the whole session in the back of his mind as he contemplates what to do. Ultimately, Doug folds the best hand. You can't fault him for making the laydown. I took a strange line that I wouldn't necessarily always take if it weren't for some game flow factors at play. It's good to get that one through. Here we've got Jack 4 clubs and the under the gun +1 straddle. It's another 5-10, 25-50 hand. Hunter's out to get revenge against me. He raises the 200 from the small blind. I'll give him an opportunity to get some of his money back. I defend the straddle. We're heads up in position. Every one of these pots we're playing has the potential to get huge quickly. The flop comes Queen 9-6 rainbow. We've got nothing except backdoor draws. The small blind bets 300. We've got position and a lot of cards that can help us on the turn. The opponent could just be taking a stab at it and will give up on future streets, allowing us to possibly steal it later. I call one time to see what develops. The turn is the king of diamonds, giving us a straight draw. We also have pretty good card removal, making it less likely that we're up against a straight or a hand like king jack or queen jack. The small blind slows down and checks. So far, this is going about how I drew it up. I just need to bet, have Hunter fold, and stack the chips. I make it 850 to mostly represent a straight. I could also play some sets and 2-pair hands this way as well. Hunter goes off script. He calls. He wasn't supposed to do that. It seems that he may have a hand like ace-queen or queen-10. The river is another king. The small blind checks. I hope that he didn't check call on the previous street for pot control with a king, then improved the trips. We've completely bricked. We've got about the worst hand that we'll ever have. Don't worry about that though. Think about the hands that we could have that we would have played this way, like king-queen, king-9, pocket 9s, pocket 6s, and jack-10. I may even play king-jack or king-10 this way as well. Once the small blind check calls the turn, he's going to have very few of those hands. My goal is to appear strong and get the opponent to fold. I announce a bet of
1800.
This should look like we're going for pure value. It should look like we want to get called. When I bet rivers for similar amounts previously at this table, even though they were for larger percentages of the pot, they mostly have been for value. I want Hunter's hands containing a queen to fold. If this play gets through, it'll put me well above the even mark, and it'll get the stack into 5-figure territory. A full minute goes by, and a top-level pro with multiple 6-figure scores from WSOP and WPT final tables is no closer to coming to a decision. While he's tanking, no one says a word in order to allow him to concentrate. There's a big pot and a friendly table, so no one's considering calling the clock either. I'm trying to remain as still as I could possibly be to not give anything away. After almost exactly 2 minutes of tanking, Hunter finally decides that he can find a better spot and he folds. We get the biggest complete bluff through of the day. This one feels unbelievable after the roller coaster that we've been on. Then I pick up ace-4 diamonds in the hijack and open to 120. Cutoff calls, the small blind 3-bets to 380. The action's back on me. Let's see what upswing says to do. According to this chart, when we're facing a 3-bet from the small blind with ace-4 suited, we need to 4-bet it. That's what I do.
Raise.
I make it 1,000. cutoff folds immediately. Small blind is contemplating what he should do. He tanks for a very long time. He doesn't look extremely comfortable, but he eventually makes the call. I imagine he has a hand like ace king, ace queen, pocket queens, or pocket jacks. The dealer puts out the flop of 10-6 deuce rainbow with 1 diamond. We've got an over and some backdoor possibilities. Small blind checks. I down bet to 900. That's what I do with aces and kings. Those hands are what I'm trying to represent. Small blind continues to look uncomfortable. You can see him there in the black shirt. He adjusts himself quite a bit. He's going through all the options for quite some time, gets his chips out and makes the call. Really feels like he has an ace high hand. I'm not beating any of those, but I don't think he'd be able to call another bet if he doesn't make a pair. The dealer puts out the turn. It's the 7 of spades, basically a complete blank. The opponent checks. I can either shut down or I can go with my gut and apply maximum pressure. I announce a bet.
2,300. 2,300.
My heart is racing. This is by far the biggest bluff that I've ever attempted. The adrenaline's pumping. There's already over 6,000 in the middle. If I get called, the pot will be 8,500. If I lose, I'll have the worst losing session of my entire life. The opponent backhands his cards into the muck. We get the largest bluff through that we've ever made. Going with our instincts pays off huge. We add another 2,000 to our stack. Round 2 will be a battle of the blinds. After losing some $100 bomb pots, I've got pocket 10s in the big blind. My opponent has 2 cards that I can't see in the small blind since they're unfortunately face down, making my job a lot tougher. He limps in for 40, I raise to 200. Small blind calls, it's heads up and we're in position. The flop comes ace 5-4 with 2 spades, not particularly good for us. We have second pair without the ability to improve much going forward. Small blind checks, I check back for pot control. The turn is the 9 of clubs. Small blind went through a period of time in high school and college when he experimented with pot, control, but he's grown out of that phase. He bets 500. My hand is under repped. I call to avoid being exploited. The river is another 9. All the major draws miss like spades, and hands like 8-7 and 7-6. The opponent is a crossing guard's worst nightmare because he isn't slowing down. He bets 1,500. This puts me in a pretty uncomfortable spot. There are quite a few things going through my head, and the first is that I beat a ton of bluffs, even a hand like 5-4 that got counterfeited. The problem with calling here is that I really don't want the opponent to show me that he took me to Value Town with some kind of weak ace, and figured that I'd have the exact hand that I have, or kings through jacks. He shouldn't have a strong ace himself, since he limped in. I can actually have some really big hands and play it the same way up to this point, like quad 9s, aces full of 9s, 9s full of aces, trip 9s, and ace king. The opponent has about 5k total. I've actually never had a 5k flag in my stack before this session. I'm feeling patriotic. Let's put it to use in order to send a message. This might be a big game for me, but I came to play.
All in.
There was no sweat. The player folded immediately. I get the biggest bluff of my life through. I went with my instincts. The opponent wasn't strong enough to withstand maximum pressure. We'd likely had him beat though, which is why calling would have been perfectly fine, especially since I didn't have a blocker to 10-9 of spades. Still, there's some small chance that he folded something better. Doesn't matter anymore. We come out victorious and have over 17,000 in the stack. We pick up Queen 4 suited in the hijack. I open to 120. Cut off calls. He's been regularly 3-betting me and putting me in difficult spots. I'm sure he's a nice guy away from the table, but he's been annoying to play against, and I've had enough of him. We're heads up and out of position. The flop is 10-9-8 with 2 hearts. We've got a flush draw, gut shot straight draw, and 1 over. Altogether, it's good for us. I bet 200 is a semi-bluff. The player calls without thinking too long about it. If he had a straight, set, or 2-pair hand, he'd probably take more time and possibly would have raised. He probably has a 1-pair type of hand or draw himself. The turn is the deuce of clubs. That's as blank as it gets. I'm not in the frame of mind to hold anything back, and at least one of the queens is accounted for, making it less likely that I'm up against queen jack. I'm going to rep a straight, set, or 2-pair hand. I make nearly a pot-sized bet of 700. The opponent grabs chips and flats again. If he's strong here, he's showing the patience of one of those monks who meditate so long that they turn into a mummy. I really think that he's got a hand with little showdown value at the moment. I'm not sure that I want a heart to come out because a queen-high flush could be no good. The river is the 4 of diamonds. We make 4th pair. This is mostly a brick though. I don't want to have to rely on my pair of 4s to win this. I bet 3,000 basically as a complete bluff. It's great to have a queen in my hand. It isn't all that great to have 2 hearts though. The opponent's a good player. He knows that I'm mostly going to have a straight or nothing in this situation. He's only going to have 1 pair a lot of the time. He's staring me down to try and get a read on me. It's incredibly tense when you're sitting there overbetting the pot, hoping to get the largest bluff of your life through while someone's scrutinizing your every move. I'm trying not to think about the potential outcomes. It's impossible not to. This bluff is either going to induce a fold and my stack will be at 14,000, or it's going to fail miserably, and I'll have lost 4,000 in this hand for almost no reason, and I'll be stuck at demoralizing 11,000 in this game. My opponent is extremely skeptical, yet he eventually folds, our massive bluff gets through, resulting in us having an extra 5,000 in our stack that we wouldn't have had if we had gotten called. There's a ton of adrenaline coursing through my body. I still have work to do though. Here we're dealt ace-10 suited in the small blind, the straddle's on, under the gun +1 raises to 120. The hijack calls, I call, the under the gun straddler calls, we're going 4 ways to the flop. It's 10-7-4 with 2 diamonds and a heart. We have top and a backdoor flush draw. I check, the under the gun player checks, the early position raiser also checks. This is a really important aspect because it means he probably won't have anything too strong, otherwise he would have bet to avoid giving 3 other players a chance to see a free card while some draws are out there. The hijack is last to act, he bets 280. I consider check raising, instead I call. Under the gun folds right away. Under the gun +1 calls, which I find really interesting after he checked initially. He probably only has a 1-pair hand at best. He could have a flush draw or something like 2 overs with backdoor draws. 3 of us make it to the turn, it's the 3 of clubs, a blank other than the fact that 6-5 is a straight. All of us check. This indicates that the hijack isn't very strong and won't have 2-pair or better. Ace-10 will often be the best hand. The river is the 7 of diamonds, the flush draw gets there and the board pairs. I don't like seeing it, still, we could have the winner. I put out a small bet of 500 in an attempt to get the showdown cheaply. On rare occasions, I'll do this with something close to the nuts as well. I said earlier that I didn't think under the gun +1 would be all that strong after check calling the flop bet as the pre-flop raiser, yet here he is raising me on the river to 2160. He'll never have a full house in this spot because he would have either bet the flop himself or at least check raised with a set after the hijack bet and I called. Also, I have a 10, making it even less likely that the opponent has a full house. The best hand under the gun +1 will have is a flush. Some of the time, I'd expect him to bet diamond draws on the flop as well, so maybe he's just turning something like ace-king offsuit with the ace of diamonds into a bluff after seeing my blocker bet. The hijack folds. I contemplate flatting because I'm not buying while under the gun +1 is selling. The problem is that there's a moderate chance that the opponent has what he's representing, which is a flush. I can still have flushes, and I can have full houses or even quads. If I had pocket 10s or another set, I might have played it the same way with just a call on the flop and the last player to act bets. Under the gun +1 only has 4,800 total. I don't see how he can call a shove with almost anything that he played this way because a 3-bet jam looks incredibly strong and there's only one combo of pocket 10s available for him to have. I go with my gut and I announce that I'm all in for 4,800 effective. It's one of the gutsiest plays that I've ever made. I'm not advocating that anyone else do this. I've turned a hand that has plenty of value into a bluff. It's not entirely necessary, but it's something that I don't mind doing when I put my opponents on a capped range and I have good removal. You saw me bluff shove earlier in the 5-10 game with king-queen and it didn't work out. If it doesn't work out here, I'll have gotten destroyed today for one of my biggest losses ever. As the opponent is tanking longer and longer, it's becoming more likely that he didn't raise my river bet as a bluff. After 45 seconds, the player eventually folds. Our assessment of the situation pays off. We get a massive 3-bet river shove through to take down an enormous pot when the opponent didn't have to call too much more to get to showdown. Our story was convincing enough. This feels amazing to win. It's one of my absolute favorite hands that I've ever played. Here we've got 7-6 suited in the cutoff. I raise to 1,000. Hellmuth defends his straddle for 600 more. We're heads up in position. The flop comes 8-3 deuce with 2 clubs and a diamond. It's not a terrible flop for us since we have a lot of backdoor draws. Plus, we have removal for hands like 8-7 and 8-6 suited. Hellmuth checks. I don't expect him to connect with the flop all that often, and our hand has no showdown value at the moment. I bet 800 as a bluff. Phil puts in a tiny check raise to 1,800. To his credit, it puts me in an annoying spot because we're getting 5-1 pot odds. It doesn't seem like he's that strong when he makes this move. There are lots of cards that can help us improve, including diamonds, any 10, 9, 5, or 4 as well. I call one time with plans of likely turning our hand into a bluff at some point if an opportunity becomes available. The turn is the 3 of clubs. Phil may be worried that we hit the flush. He checks. I was mostly hoping for a card that would help us improve, or at least a high card that we could potentially use as a bluff. I check back. The river is the 4 of clubs, giving Hellmuth a 9-high flush. He checks once more, so it's unlikely that he likes his hand too much. There's a very good chance that he doesn't have a club after checking on both the turn and the river, but we can rep one. I bet 2,000. It's a small bet just to fold out all hands Hellmuth might have that doesn't contain a club. Unfortunately for us, Hellmuth does a club check and finds he indeed has one in his hand. He calls. We lose an extra couple thousand. The The game has basically become twice as big with the straddles on every hand, and now that I've lost a few, I'm down slightly below even for the session. Yo Viral comes in as an alternate for Ivy. He buys into the game for $500,000 to start. Even with the graphics finally getting sorted out for us, we still have less than 1/6 that amount in front of us as we raise to 600 with Jack 10 of hearts. Hellmuth calls in the small blind with a hand that doesn't have us in great shape. We're heads up in position. The flop comes King Queen 3 rainbow. We've got the straight draw with backdoor flush possibilities on a board that will more often than not favor us as the pre-flop aggressor. Hellmuth checks. We're drawing to the nuts and can pretty much get all the pocket pairs from 10s down to 4s to fold with a bet. I fire for 700 as a semi-bluff. Hellmuth is going nowhere with his top pair. He cuts out chips quickly and makes the call. The turn is the deuce of spades. Hellmuth immediately checks as it comes out. We've got air, but perhaps we can get a hand like Queen Jack or Queen 10 to fold this juncture if we bet. We can have hands like sets of kings and sets of queens on this flop that Hellmuth won't have. I bet 2,000 to keep the pressure on, not anticipating getting check raised almost ever. Hellmuth throws a wrench in that plan with a min raise to 4,000. If he had a 2-pair or better hand, I would have expected a bigger sizing. We're getting 4.5 to 1 on the call, so we're getting about the right pot odds to stick around, especially when considering any implied odds that we may have if we drill a 9. We call for 2,000 more. The river is the 5 of spades. We brick, but the backdoor flush draw gets there. Hellmuth is concerned that we could have a flush, aces, ace king, or something else that beats him. He checks. We've got the worst hand that we'll ever have. We played it like we had a draw on the turn, then the best draw got there. We don't even beat ace jack or ace 10 if that's what Phil might have put the check raise bluff in with. I still get the sense that we're up against a 1-pair hand like a king or a queen. We'll have to bet a decent amount to get a king to fold. I'm going to fire big.
9,000?
Having only jack high and some of the draws making it, Brad will feel compelled to bluff this river. I like this bluff.
I don't even know if I can take it anymore.
It would be nice to have a spade, but it is the type of board where it's somewhat difficult for Brad to have bluffs. Most likely his only bluffs to choose from are jack 10. Perhaps he has a little bit of ace jack, ace 10, but those may even just check and see showdown. So nice execution here by Brad. Whether or not it works, we're going to find out.
Phil is feeling the heat, so he unzips that jacket as he's put to the test. He knows that he really doesn't beat anything that I'd be betting for value. He has a pure bluff catcher if he wants to call. The thing that I have going for me is that I haven't shown down any big bluffs so far today, so my image is really solid. The bad thing is that Phil has stuck a good chunk, making him perhaps more likely to call, and by this time he's aware that Doyle bluffed him earlier for quite a bit. He likely doesn't want to get bluffed twice on stream in fairly large pots. This is a situation which, if you're Phil, you prefer to have a spade in your hand so that there are fewer combos that I could have like ace jack, jack 10, or jack 9 of spades. I'm doing my very best not to give anything away as I'm putting on one of the biggest bluffs that I've ever put on anyone, and it's the man with more accolades than anyone else in poker. He doesn't want to let go.
Phil does find the call. Wow. He's going to be very
Let's go.
happy.
Fuck, I couldn't
see that he has
imagine
the
a
best
hand I
hand.
could beat, so I kept saying to myself, stop imagining, because you can't beat anything. Just decide whether he has it or not.
Positivity.
After 5.5 hours of running it up, Hellmuth makes a difficult call, causing us to lose over half of our profit. About 45 minutes goes by, then Hook opens in the hijack to 1200. We're 6-handed, so he's second to act pre-flop. Terrace is in the cutoff with a couple of ducks. He calls. We wake up in the small blind with pocket 10s. We can mix in mostly 3-bets with occasional calls. I call here. We're going 3 ways to the flop, out of position. It comes Queen 10-4 rainbow. We've got a sneaky middle set and a score to settle. I check. Neither player bites. They both check back pretty quickly. We see a free card. It's the Queen of Spades, giving us a full house. We're gonna have to build this pot with our own bare hands. I bet 3,000, hoping someone checks back flop for pot control with a queen. Hook glances at his cards to see if his jack turned into a queen. It unfortunately didn't. He folds. Even after winning nearly a $200,000 pot against me earlier with 10-7 suited, Terrace still has revenge mode activated, and it's cranked up to 11. He gathers raising chips, then makes it 8,000 to go while drawing completely dead. When you make big hands in these types of games, it's easy to make a lot of money because people are just putting on play after play. I wasn't making big hands on day 1, day 2, we've already gotten paid off once. Maybe we can win another 6-figure pot. I want to keep Terrace's bluffs in, so I just flat the raise. We got a river deuce in the last hand we went over. I wouldn't mind ordering seconds of that. Instead, we get the Jack of Diamonds. It's not the best river card because we could be up against Queen Jack. I check. Terrace, who looks like he comes from a long line of pillagers, tries to pillage this pot. He fires 12,000 into 20,000. While I'm a little concerned that we're up against a better full house, we could also be up against pocket fours, a straight, or just trip queens. I try to target those worst hands that won't want to make another incorrect fold against me. I put in a big check raise to 45,000. We're up against what's essentially air. Terrace doesn't have anything that he can play back at us with. He folds. It's not a six-figure pot, but it's another fairly large one that gets us all the way out of the $86,000 hold we were in at the low point of the day. Don't look now, but we're even cracking a little bit of a smile. Poker's a lot more enjoyable when you're making big hands and winning.